This is Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability in the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Department of Agricultural Economics. I'm Ryan Evans. The 2021 Nebraska Rural Poll conducted by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln looked at, among other things, the levels of trust that rural Nebraskans have in both local and national media sources. Here to discuss the findings and how trust in media has changed across the state since the Rural Poll last gauged this is Becky Vogt, Survey Research Manager for the Nebraska Rural Poll. And remind you can find out more about the results from their surveys and more about their work at ruralpoll.unl.edu. Hey, Becky, thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ryan.
Absolutely. And you've written a new article about what we're about to discuss here. It's on our website at cap.unl.edu. So first, how did the Rural Poll ask survey participants about their trust in media and information sources this last go around?
Yeah, it was part of our survey last year. We asked the respondents to rate how much they trust 16 different sources of information. And they were asked to do that using a 4-point scale that ranged from not at all to a lot. So that was how they ranked how much they trust each source.
And those 16 sources included major cable news networks, as well as network news, public radio, public broadcasting, podcasts, social media sites, news blogs, and even friends, family, and acquaintances. So what sources did you find that rural Nebraskans are most trusting of?
Yeah, we found that they most trust information received from their friends, family, and acquaintances. We saw that 3/4 or 75% so that they trust information from their friends, family, or acquaintances, either some or a lot. And other highly trusted sources that we found included local news sources, and that included both local TV news as well as local newspapers, and public sources such as PBS on TV and public radio. So we did find that interesting. These findings on media sources really mirrored the findings that we had on confidence in institutions that we discussed earlier this spring, where there was more confidence in local institutions as compared to national ones. And that's what we find here, those sources that are close to them, their friends, family, acquaintances, and those local sources. And then in addition to those public sources as well, were what they most trust.
Yeah, interesting. And how about on the other side of the coin then? What did you find out about the least trusted sources among rural Nebraskans?
Yeah, as you said, they're kind of flip the coin there. They least trust the information from social networking sites, internet blogs, MSNBC, and CNN. So we found with those sources that at least 1/2 of rural Nebraskans said they do not trust at all information received from those sources.
And generally speaking, how trusting are rural Nebraskans of the media compared to the last time the Rural Poll gauged this in 2017?
Yeah, in general, we found that rural Nebraskans are less trusting of many of these information sources than they were 4 years ago. This is compared based on looking at the proportions who answered a lot when they asked how much they trust the information sources. So we kind of looked at the really strong trust that they had and how that changed over those 4 years. Well, we did see that trust in some of the sources, about 9 or over half of those listed, remained about the same. So they didn't change a whole lot as compared to 4 years ago. But we did find that about 6 of those sources saw some more significant declines in trust.
What were some of the specific sources that saw more significant declines in trust than others maybe over the last 4 years?
Some of those that saw the declines were local TV news, local newspapers, state newspapers, Fox News, public radio, and national newspapers. Those are ones that showed a little bit more significant declines in the proportion that said they trust each a lot. As some examples, we see that the proportion trusting local TV news a lot, that declined from 27% in 2017 to 15% this year. And another example, those who trust local newspapers a lot decreased from 25% to 16%.
So it seems like trust is kind of eroding all across the board there, local and national. Is there anything you can glean from the survey results that you can use to attribute this declining trust in media to?
Yeah, I think there's several different things we can look at. First of all, two of the sources I just mentioned were those local sources, local TV news and local newspapers. And one possible explanation of that is possibly just the increasing loss of coverage of rural areas. And we found a nationwide Pew Research study that asked rural residents across the country. They say that their local news media mostly covers another area instead of the area where they live. And this, I think, especially true of the local TV news stations. Because here in Nebraska, they're only located in the micropolitan or metropolitan areas. So you're going a ways away to get that. And in fact, many rural Nebraskans get local TV news from another state. I grew up in the northeast part of the state, and our local TV news came from Sioux City. So you're not always getting that real super local information from that. So that might be part of it. And when we look at local newspapers, we've also seen a loss or consolidation of those in recent years. And there's a UNC School of Journalism database that showed that Nebraska has seen a 9% decline in the number of newspapers between 2004 and 2019. That was their latest information that they had. And that same database also reported that we have 8 counties in the state without any newspaper and 43 counties with only a single newspaper. So again, that could offer a little bit more context around declining trust in local sources. As for the overall decline, we see that trend happening across the country. Nationwide polls, your Gallup polls, your Pew Research polls are all showing declining trust in media, and especially among conservative voters is the trend that we're seeing there. And given that the majority of rural residents identify as conservative in their political views, it's not really a surprise to see that trend is also mirrored here.
That's interesting. And what does studying all of this tell you about the role of local media in rural Nebraska? Why is the rural poll interested in asking these questions?
I think it's important to know what sources rural Nebraskans are using to get their information and how much they trust that information, because, as we've seen the last couple of years of the pandemic, it's important to know, are they trusting what information that they're receiving, and that's just one example of that type of information. And I think that even though we saw a decline in the trust of local information sources, we still see that most rural Nebraskans say they trust information from local newspapers and local TV news, either some or a lot. So they're still placing trust in that. And I think that shows that rural residents understand the need for local media that can highlight, the issues impacting them, as well as the news from their local area. In addition, some studies have shown that there is a relationship between consumption of community news or information to civic engagement. So I think if local media can maintain trust from their local residents, that definitely will help Nebraska communities, because they'll have a more informed and engaged base.
All right, great stuff as always from Becky Vogt, Survey Research Manager for the Nebraska Rural Poll. Again, you can find a new article that goes more in depth on what we've been talking about here today, and you can also see the results of this question on the 2021 Rural Poll, the results from that poll on our website at cap.unl.edu. Becky, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.